Hello, I'm Annnnd I, and I have the privilege of sitting down with Dan Green. Now, you may not know Dan Green by name, but I'm sure you'll know his voice. Mr. Dan, thank you very much for allowing me this time.
You're very, very welcome.
So, Dan Green has voiced in a number of animes. He's voiced in Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, Sonic, and ones you may not have heard of. Could you tell a couple of the fans some that are not as well known as Yu-Gi-Oh?
Samurai Deeper Kyo is one of my favorite ones that I had the pleasure of doing. This is about many years ago, and part of what made that project really fun for me was that I not only helped to adapt the scripts, which as probably most of your listeners know, that's when you take the original raw Japanese translation and then use words that mean the same thing, but also fit the image as best you can. And then I also got to direct not the first volume of that, but the subsequent volumes of that. So that was a lot of fun to do.
So you've not only been a voice actor, but you've been a director as well?
Yeah, and a lot of that directorial experience was for doing anime projects for NYAV Post, Mike Sitter Nicholas's studio. And I was working with those guys for, I guess, a couple years. And I also have directed some theater and directed also some other stuff for Marvel. But it was a voiceover related thing. So I really enjoy directing in audio, but I also like directing for theater as well. But the audio stuff is definitely more lucrative.
That's fair. You have a background in theater. Is that what got you started where you are?
Well, yeah, in a sense. So I went to a university and to study acting, and it was one of the top 5, I guess, in the country at the time for studying acting. And in that time, this is back in the 1800s. Just kidding. But so the approach to training actors, it's called the conservatory approach or a traditional approach, and so you have 3 principal programs in movement, voice, and acting. It was for several years, and when I graduated from that, I had no intention or even idea of becoming a voice actor. And one of my classmates, a few years down the road, he ended up directing anime, and he asked me, "Well, hey, would you be interested in doing some?" But I was really focused on theater. That was my favorite medium to perform in, and a lot of actors will tell you that the stage is really more of the actor's medium as opposed to film, which is more of a director's medium. And I have done small amounts of film and some on-camera television work. But anyway, at that time, I really wanted to do more theater. When I graduated, my dream was to be part of a conservatory where, not a conservatory, but a theater where you're doing a series of plays. You're part of a company, right? I didn't want to be famous. I had no ambition to be famous, I should say. But that form of theater culture, which had been part of the American culture about a generation or half a generation previously, that just wasn't sustained anymore, right? So it was very rare to find that kind of work. There are even, now there's maybe one theater that you could have that kind of career with. Anyway, so he asked me would I care to do some background voices in a pretty low tier anime. I know there's lots of great anime, and there's lots that isn't. And anyway, I wasn't judgmental of the work. I was just like, no thanks. And but he's like, no, come on, And I was like, oh, okay. And so it was through that friendship that I had the opportunity to perform in anime for the first time. And it just so happened that that project was being done by the same studio that was doing Pokemon, Taj Productions, and was the name of the studio. 4Kids was using Taj Productions to record Pokemon. And so, because I was doing this other stuff, unrelated to 4Kids, just only related purely because it was anime and it was going through Taj Productions, that's how my voice got heard by people who worked at 4Kids. And that enabled me to get an audition for certain things, and I ended up getting lucky with some of those castings.
That's incredible. It's a complex but amazing story.
I guess so. It wasn't a boring one.
No, not at all. Very fascinating.
And you will find, I think anybody that has some form of success, not just in performance and entertainment industry, but certainly including that, a lot of it has to do with who you know. Not in a weird manipulative way. It's just where you you're fortunate enough to find some sort of access in.
Wow. So it's just like in any job. It's
Yeah.
who you know will get you far or not at all.
Well, what I don't want the listeners to mistakenly take away from that, it's not like just because you have a friend, you're going to have a great career, or that your career is going to be based on how you manipulate your relationships. People do that, but that's a very, I think, poor way of going about it, leading your life. I've been fortunate enough to be able to, I do some teaching, and I've done some casting as well. I've met actors and made recommendations, and hey, told people, hey, you should audition this actor, and blah, blah, blah. And in any way that I've been involved in helping people get into this field of work or another field of work, people can be very grateful, right? And they'll say things like, thank you, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been able to blah, 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 blah. And my feeling is, well, I made the recommendation, but you got the job. You got cast, and you kept on getting cast. So that's your achievement, right? I did have a small part, but the achievement is really something that you should own.
So because of your background in theater and voice acting, and knowing that fans who have grown up with Yu-Gi-Oh, such as myself, will show their children, siblings, and maybe cousins
Right.
Yu-Gi-Oh, you have children of your own. The fans may not know that.
Mm-hmm. I have twins and of each gender,
Aw.
and and they're 5 years old, and it is really just this past 6 or 7 months that they've wondered, what is Pokemon about?
Aw.
What is Yu-Gi-Oh? And so I'm fine with them, watching that stuff and getting into that stuff. As a parent, I want my kids to be exposed to things and just let their interests, develop naturally. Right. I'm also like a huge comic book fan. So, so in my house, you'll find lots of action figures and comic books and stuff like that. And they do like that stuff, right? But I'm not trying to indoctrinate them and brainwash them. You will watch Star Wars and like it. So I only said that a few times. But anyway, so and it's really interesting to see how a child embraces stuff and what it is that they're responding to.
That brings up a question that I personally had. If your children become interested in not only theater but voice acting and voiceover, would you encourage them, and would you point them out in directions that would help them?
Yeah, I think it's pretty conventional wisdom to support whatever interest your children have. I think at this stage, when they're, with my children as an example, they're so young, they're probably going to have many interests, over the course of their life. And really, the things that you really become concerned about is when they're more mature through high school, what's the path they're going to try to find into adulthood, and even in that example where there's really more on the line, I think you really have to trust your child's own development. And so if they wanted to go into some form of performance, whether it's acting or specifically voiceover, yeah, I would encourage that and try to help that. I would not mandate that for them. I would not presume that they were going to succeed at that. I am one of those parents that doesn't need my child to be an extension of me. I want them to be them. That's why we have them. So. But I wouldn't be surprised if they became interested in those kinds of things. I mean, performance is very compelling. It's very interesting. If you have a facility for it, well, why not? And that wouldn't necessarily even mean on a career level. There's you can do a lot of creative stuff that you don't make your living on, but it's incredibly rewarding, not just for yourself, but for the people who participate in your creativity.
That's incredible, and I think that's good advice for any parent, is to just let your child be them.
I didn't make that idea up, but I think it's a good one.
It's always good, to have that around, to see someone who has a career such as you, but can also be relatable as any normal parent. It's good advice.
Oh, I hope so.
So going back to the becoming into voice acting and voiceover, How is it being not only with 4K Media, but other companies that you worked with? Are they similar in the way they construct their voice actors in the shows, or are they different personally for you?
Well, it's a little bit of both. So there are certain similarities, but every work environment has its own particular dynamic, right? So if we keep a narrow focus on anime production, and I haven't been doing a lot of anime in the last several years, but at the time when I was more active, to compare, let's say, NYAV Post to 4K, or at the time 4Kids, the material is very similar in the sense that it's anime, right? That's made more accessible to the American culture. Now, the scale on which 4Kids was doing that, and I'm talking about primarily a financial scale, is much bigger compared to what was happening with NYAV Post. That's not a reflection on NYAV Post as not being a good studio. What that really more is an example of is that 4Kids had already had huge success with other franchises and licenses, and this is all kind of the boring businessy talk, but they have this huge financial structure company that got lucky with other things, and then Pokemon came along, and then in a very unlikely development, Yu-Gi-Oh was also popular, not in the same way as Pokemon. So the way that the way that decisions are made in that kind of bigger corporate environment, and corporate is not a bad word, but there are many more people involved because the stakes are bigger, the literal production is bigger. The kinds of work you have to do is more demanding. You're dealing, at the time, because it was being broadcast, back when there were such things as Saturday morning cartoons. I mean, really, Yu-Gi-Oh aired in the last year or two where Saturday morning cartoons was even still a viable thing. And of course, a lot of that changed because of cable, and then that's all changing now because of internet.
Yep.
Right. Again, none of that's good or bad. That's just sort of the way the media distribution evolved. And a lot of fans, particularly the purist otakus, they berate all of the Pokemon. No, that's not Pokemon, the real Pokemon. And the same thing with Yu-Gi-Oh too. And but those are decisions that are forced upon the studio by broadcasters. So we have to clean up these images. This is too disturbing. We can't have guns. We can't have blood. We can't even suggest that there's an undertone of violence in a way that most parents would find unacceptable, and so on and so forth. So those choices are not arbitrary, right? Comparing to the dynamic that NYAV Post was working with the Central Park Media properties that were released direct to DVD, well, there's far less scrutiny, right? You don't have to worry about broadcasters and networks worrying about sponsors, right? And we all know in the recent light of the Bill O'Reilly thing.
Oh, yes.
Right. Now, and also just a side note, Fox did not evolve in its consciousness and in its compassion to women. They made that choice based on finance, right? Financial imperatives, because their sponsors developed a conscience about women and the associations to their brands, right? But anyway, side note. So,
all right.
so glad that at least a few women are going to get more respect. But anyway, but with the NYAV stuff, there was much more freedom in a sense because we had fewer people that were needing to be satisfied. And another element that I really appreciated about working with Mike Sinner-Nicholas and Sean Schemmel was also directing there at the time. And, there was a very principled view of the theory, the philosophy to the approach of our work was we're going to try to keep it as true to the original intent as possible. And so then that informs on how you adapt a script, right? There's an inclination to make something more appealing to kids by throwing jokes in there, right? Okay, that's fine. I'm not saying it's a bad choice, but that had nothing to do with why we were doing what we were doing, right? And it was working on a number of those shows where you're able to gain a real appreciation of what is the original, what does it sound like, what's the mood, what's the feeling, what's the attitude behind the performance, right? What level of reality are we dealing with? Every story has a different slightly different sense of reality, even stories that are based on the reality we live in, right? So being attenuated to that and trying to draw out those values, not just in the scripting, but also obviously in the performances that you're directing, that was really more of the philosophy at NYAV Post. So they're different in that way, right? But for that's based on, again, what audience are these shows being released to? What is the presumption of what those audiences want? And how best are you able to satisfy what you imagine those demands to be?
So it all depended on what particular show, anime, movie that they released. That would depend on what the company would tell you to do.
Exactly, and how much they felt they needed to be involved, how long your leash was, how short your leash was, right? And also keeping an eye out for what's your audience. The audience of a Pokemon or a Sonic or a Yu-Gi-Oh, yeah, that's going to be different than the audience of a Samurai Deeper Kyo or what have you. But obviously there's some crossover as well. Right?
Of course.
Yeah.
So as a director and voice actor, did anything funny happen in the booth by chance?
Never. There was never laughter. It was all dour, serious, of course. Of course, there was tons. And,
Any event that comes to mind in particular?
there are too many to choose from. No, seriously. And I'm not one of those. You might find some performers will regale you in lovely stories about how funny they were in the booth one moment or another. I don't hold on to those in that way. Okay, well, I don't have a specific. Oh, maybe I do have a specific. But this is, again, just an example, and it's not necessarily going to be the funniest thing that ever happened. But when I was doing Descendants of Darkness, I was doing that with, basically I'd show up and there'd be this wonderful engineer, Jimmy Regan, and Arlen Tarlovsky was directing. And these are guys that were very easy to get along with. And so we would often be joking around. And in doing this work, they accused me. They gave me the reputation within our small group of three that I could ad-lib a cue before even seeing the shot.
Really?
That's what they said. I'm not saying it's true, but there were many times because when you're dubbing, you do need to see the shot before you understand how to apply the line for a number of reasons. Like, is this line adapted properly? Are there enough syllables for me to use? But also, what's the intention behind the performance, and so on and so forth.
Can you match the lip flaps as well?
Well, that's that's necessary. And usually, what happens in dubbing anime is you see the shot and you're just marking the line to see if you can fit it, and then on the second or third or whatever subsequent takes, you're really finessing the performance. But yeah, so they accused me of being able to nail the flap without having seen it, right? And very often in this more lighthearted atmosphere, I wouldn't bother with the real line. I'd just be like, just say something. And I don't know. There was one climactic moment toward the end of the series, and the confrontation between Suzuki and a very tense moment. We've been building up the whole story, and and this is later in the volumes, right? Mm-hmm. We've been working on this over the course of several weeks or whatever it was. And in a very tense, dramatic moment where Suzuki was going to say something defiant, and I'm going to perish you and whatever. Just again on that first pass, I said something like, "I will validate your parking" or something, just absurd. I don't even know if that's what I really said, but so fun moments like that, yeah, for sure.
As a director, did any of that happen to you on the other side of the booth?
You want to encourage that. You want to encourage playfulness. Not that you aren't taking the work seriously.
Of course.
But performers, like anyone, they benefit from humor and looseness, and to foster an atmosphere of tension and judgment and that sort of a thing. I see why certain directors feel that's necessary, but that's seldom the best way to get a performance to where you want it to be. Yeah, so there's a lot of playfulness, while still trying to get the job done, being very diligent about that, right? But people are, in general, not just in terms of providing a creative performance, but people in general are going to be in a better state if they are open and feel safe and feel validated.
They're the part of a family.
And, well, that's another way of looking at it, sure, and that sense of camaraderie exists. I definitely associate those years with a core group of people I was seeing so frequently, right? Those were my colleague family of friends. Right?
Like Eric Stewart and Wayne Grayson with Yu-Gi-Oh?
Absolutely. Wayne Grayson was my dearest friends. He lives across the street from me.
Oh,
That
wow.
happened quite by accident. At least that's what I told the authorities.
Goodness.
No. And Eric and I are actually better friends now. Not that we weren't friendly then, but that relationship started back then in a work circumstance, and now I count him as one of my best friends, and I can do that while also a mutual friend of ours, Anthony Salerno. He's the guy that suggested. He was my fellow classmate that suggested,
Oh.
"Hey, you want to come in and
And
try this out, and try this anime thing." So, the three of us, including Mark Thompson, who's probably one of the most talented voiceover actors ever, we game every Wednesday night.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
So I have to ask.
Please.
With Darkside of Dimensions coming out and being able to see all your old friends,
Yeah.
how did you feel about that? Were you excited? Were you just like, oh, I have to deal with these people again?
No feeling of rolling my eyes at all. And what I think though should be made clear is that when we're recording, you don't see the person you're in the scene with. You're working with the director and an engineer. So it's, in that sense, isolated from the rest of the cast. But you do get to have those sort of reunion moments going to the premiere, right? And those sorts of things. So that's great. But because we are friends, I see them and have contact with, we don't need the show to connect us, right? In terms of just being in contact and involved. The real sense of returning to an old friend, it was returning to the characters.
You gotta tell me how that was like, being Yugi and Yami. Well, mostly Yugi, but being
in that particular movie, yeah.
Yeah, being Yugi again, and then having Yami as a smaller role as opposed to the show where he was a huge role. What was that like, reuniting with those old friends?
Well, it's great, and I haven't done a lot of conventions, and I've only been doing them more recently, mainly because I get to see Eric. He draws me into these things, right? I don't think I've ever made a U.S. Well, I guess when I do like the competition, the Worlds and
the tournaments.
The tournaments, yes. That I don't do because of Eric. That's through Konami, and they've been wonderful and great. And I'm very flattered that they keep bringing me into those things. But reuniting with a character that you've known and you're familiar with is a wonderful thing to be able to do, especially if you actually enjoy those characters. And I've never had the opposite experience. So I've never had, please don't make me do that character again.
You've never had any character you're like, oh.
I've never had any character that I've had to return to. Maybe there might be some characters I'm like, well, I'm glad that's over. But specifically with Darkside of Dimensions, I found it very interesting to return to Yugi when he's slightly older. Mm-hmm. And there was discussion with the people at 4K. We want to make the voice sound a little older, but not, it's still recognizably Yugi. Mm-hmm. And they pretty much liked what I did right out of the gate, which was nice. And
nice.
And just on a side note about Yugi's voice, there was, if you listen back through the whole series, you'll see there's a lot of variation. Mm-hmm. And some of that comes from producers and directors determining what they want. Those choices are not really made by the actor, even though the actor often bears the brunt of that from
the fans,
from the audience, right? And it's an easy, and I don't fault the audience. I mean, they aren't familiar with how production is done on those levels. So Yugi starts, and then Tem's voice changed as well. Mm-hmm. In the first season or so, he really sounded much more like my conversational voice, yes. And Yugi was really more the departure from my natural sound. And then obviously these are very different interpretations from the original Japanese.
Of course.
But in season 3, or I'm not sure where, they decided they want Yugi's voice to be really high, or that's what it felt like. But also another thing that happened, and then that I think stabilized before the series ended. But also I think there grew this attitude that in those occasions where I added a little bit more depth and regality and intensity to Yami, that became popular to the producers and the directors. So I would literally get, and again, this is over a course of a couple of years. And so sometimes I would, when we're doing pickups, redos of certain moments and that sort of a thing, Sometimes the comment from the producers would be, "Yeah, can we Yami this up a little bit?" And it was like, "Yeah, okay, I know what you mean. Just dial that." Right? So yeah, that's fun. And again, particularly with Darkside of Dimensions, I thought it was very smart that the focus was on Kaiba.
Yes,
And to what extent you were connecting to Yugi and Yami. I thought Yugi's predicament was compelling and interesting. What he had to teach Kaiba.
Yes.
And that what little we see of the representation of the Pharaoh is quite short, right? I thought that was smart, keeping in mind that the last time we really dealt with these characters, bearing in mind Bonds Beyond Time.
Yes, of course.
But the Bonds Beyond Time was sort of bubble story,
yes.
Right?
A crossover episode.
A crossover bubble story where they might have been trying to market all of the iterations of Yu-Gi-Oh! Maybe, I'm just a guess. But
we'll keep that to ourselves.
I'm not saying it was a good or bad choice. I'm just saying maybe that was in their mind. But with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Story proper, right, from the first series, those characters are resolved. What really more is there to say about Yugi or Atem, right?
Fair.
Right? I mean, if you say, oh, well, you thought that was resolved, but no, wait, there's something else. Well, arguably that kind of takes away from the whole arc of the first story. So I thought it was interesting that the creator protected that.
So did you like that the movie came out, or would you prefer to have left it back at Dawn of the Duel when we had Yugi and Yami depart from each other?
I liked this installment. I liked this story. I think it touched upon the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! In a way that was I'm going to say more matured, right? And I thought the choices were smart. I thought the situations were relatable. And I can say without equivocation that Darkside of Dimensions is my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie.
Without a doubt?
Yeah. Because to me, it feels more like a conventional story than any other Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie. Now, I am not trying to say the other movies are bad, and the way in which I think they are noticeably different is there's less dueling.
Yes.
There's less dueling terminologies. There's actually less dueling in general, right? And again, I'm not saying that stories which focus on a lot of dueling are bad, but for me as the audience, it was great to have time with these characters as people and seeing what they're like in their relationships and what they mean to each other.
It's incredible that you think, some voice actors be like, oh, well, I got to go back to this character, oh, whatever, but you really put your heart and soul, I've researched a few of your characters, you put your heart and soul into each and every one of them. I can hear a bit of you, do you put a bit of yourself into each of your characters?
Well, so remembering that I get to this conversation with you from pursuing acting, committedly, studying at a university. This is not, for a casual interest, right?
Of course not.
And trying to be an actor, a professional actor, you need to be motivated by something that is relevant to you, right? And what you learn, and not that anybody necessarily has to teach you this, but they definitely will reinforce this. If you want to have compelling creative experiences, it is your job to put your heart into it. So if you feel that I've done that in some of the work that I've done, then I feel that I've delivered on my responsibility as creative and specifically as an actor. I've delivered on my responsibility at least on a bare minimum. So I might watch a show and even whatever it might be, a movie or a television show or whatever, and maybe the story sucks or the other production elements aren't great. And maybe this actor is performing a character and the character's not written very well or whatever. But I always keep attention to how is the actor working, right? And the role itself may not succeed, but I always appreciate the devotion and the commitment of an actor, even in a flawed story, right? So, big comic book fan, and the last X-Men movie, X-Men Apocalypse,
Yes.
right? Say, my opinion, and in the opinion of many others, pretty flawed, right? Oscar Isaac, I think, is one of the finest actors of our generation, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot of compelling performances from, a lot more compelling performances from him. And he portrayed the character of Apocalypse.
Yes.
He did as well as anyone could possibly do, maybe even better than anyone should rightly do. But ultimately, that role was not successful. Not his fault.
No.
Right? But you understand what I mean.
Yes.
He was committed. There was no doubt he showed up for his job.
You mentioned coming back to doing conventions, that you mostly did tournaments back in the earlier days of going to conventions. There was video of you being at Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments, but you're starting to be more at conventions. And you mentioned putting not only yourself out there again with Eric kind of leading you to help you, but putting your devotion out and seeing the reactions of the fans and being able to meet Yugi in real life, and being able to, meet Knuckles, meet Entei, meet all the other characters that I could not, that would probably take too long to list.
I haven't. Yeah.
Bringing up those fans, have you ever received any strange gifts from them? Just the strangest gift you can think of?
The strangest gift? The answer is nothing provocatively strange that would necessarily make for a funny story.
No.
But one of the most interesting gifts I got.
Interesting works.
Okay. So when the show was originally out and popular and so forth, I, thanks to Sean Schemmel, I was able to get invited to more than just anime conventions, but that occur in Australia and New Zealand. And so it's like, well, free trip to there. Oh, how can I say no? And one of the mothers of a fan, and again, this is right when it came out, so the very young
Beginning.
boys, and they hadn't yet become the 20-somethings that tell me I'm the voice of their childhood, which is so flattering. So the mother had brought me a can, like you would find a can of beans in or something like that, and the fans there were fans of Yu-Gi-Oh, but also Sonic, right? Oh. So she gave me a canned echidna because Knuckles is an echidna,
wow.
And it was like, that is so cool. But I'm never gonna open this can, even though there's a stuffed echidna in there. I kind of just I can't. It would be kind of destroying it. So yeah. And so that would be probably the most interesting gift, and the most you didn't ask this.
Unusual does work.
But the most unusual thing I've had to sign. There was a close second today with a woman's ankle, but that wasn't so bizarre.
No.
But not. I think this was one of the last things I did with Eric. But apparently, you can buy a Yu-Gi-Oh thong.
I believe that.
Yeah. So that made me laugh, and of course I don't want to make the person who gives it to me feel bad. So I was just like, oh, yeah, it's not okay, and I'm just not going to think about that anymore.
So the most interesting and unusual gifts.
Right,
Oh,
yeah.
Now, what about the most maybe not lighthearted, heartwarming reaction to meeting a fan? Can you remember?
Sure. Yeah. So this happens. There's way more than one example of this, but this is kind of the category. And a moment happened like this just today. So a fan comes up, and they're having a big emotional moment, right? They're nervous and they're excited and with this example today, this woman said that she'd been waiting 14 years to meet Dan Green. And also in explaining why she was in such a state, she said, "You helped me through my depression," right? And just a couple months ago, as Eric and I were departing that lovely convention, one of the attendees kind of chased me down. Sounds like he was stalking me. It wasn't like that at all. But he wanted to make sure he said something to me before we left. Eric and I are literally going across the parking lot. We'd made our goodbyes or whatever. And he
goodness.
said, I just wanted to say something. And it was totally cool. He wasn't being weird at all. Sweet guy. And we had interacted with him before. I mean, he was totally cool. But he wanted to share with me that his mother had passed away recently.
Oh.
Yeah. And for him, that show and that material, and for whatever part I had to play in it, helped him through that. Now, when people tell me these stories, I could not be more humbled. I don't have that expectation when I do my work. I certainly have never recorded anything and said, what I just did there is going to help somebody get through something really challenging. No, of course not. I'm just there. I'm just trying to work. I'm just trying to do my job and do it as well as I can, and that's what I'm supposed to do as an actor.
Yes.
But so understanding that the work you do has an impact on people in ways you would never imagine, that's a huge gift.
It's incredible.
Yeah. And now, I've never had any presumption that anything I would do would be like that for someone else. But of course, I have those relationships to things in my life. I went through serious depression. I was in therapy for over a decade. Part of the challenges I grew up with started with finding my father dead when I was 4.5.
Oh no.
Yeah. And then, as others might know, I've been presented with other challenges recently. But but for me, when I was younger, going through those dark times, and it was really hard for me, particularly around the 15 through the early 20s, which is, I think, a hard time for anybody growing
Yes.
up. But I was able to get through that largely in thanks to the music of Peter Gabriel.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. And there are other go-tos for entertainment as well. But I mean, Star Wars is just in my fucking DNA, and so are comic books, particularly Spider-Man, especially when I was younger, right? Mm-hmm. And also just on those two examples, Star Wars and Spider-Man, two main characters whose parents are gone.
Yes.
And also, their uncles get fucking killed, right?
Yeah.
Uncle Ben and Uncle and Aunt Beru and
Yes.
Uncle Owen. But isn't it kind of weird that Luke is really more upset about Obi-Wan? Anyway, just kidding.
Yeah, no.
And Leia had a whole planet blow up, but anyway. It's a fairy tale sensibility, we all understand. But that was helpful for me as a boy. Not because I was directly identifying with those characters. It was helpful for me to have some story form that resembled parts of my life. And a thing that I find a little disturbing about how entertainment for children has veered, it's become a lot more sanitized because we don't want to upset the children.
No, not at all.
Right. But while that is a very well-intended perspective, I think it's very short-sighted. Children deal with adversity every day.
Yes.
And life doesn't determine what's fair to present to anyone. Many children experience loss or suffering from illness. Many children are terminal. What stories are they going to relate to? I'm not saying that we should come up with a series about a kid dying from cancer or whatever it may be, but I think that we should understand that stories are most resonant when they help us deal with the truths that we have to confront.
I can more than agree with that. And thank you for letting us see a dip into who you really are with that story.
I am pretty dippy.
Well, that's for another interview. But I think we are on our time.
Okay, good.
So thank you very much, Jane Green, for allowing me and 89.5 The Wave to have this interview. Now, could I have one last thing?
Absolutely, Yami.
I would be honored and extremely happy, as the rest of the station, if you could say in Yugi or Yami or any of the voices like that, could you say, this is Dan Green and you're listening to 89.5 The Wave?
89.5 The Wave.
Yes.
Okay. This is Dan Green and you're listening to 89.5 The Wave.
That was incredible. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, and this will definitely Yeah, is this all right if this is posted on, just the audio?
Yeah.
Posted online?
Yeah,
All right.
just clean up those little parts.
I will make